This is Research as It Happens. I'm Rolf Zwaan. For most people, scientific findings may seem final. A result, a conclusion, a graph. They seem to tell the whole story. But that's not really what science feels like from the inside. Right now, I'm part of a large international project with close to 100 researchers, all trying to understand how memory works. It's not the largest project in psychology, and not even the largest one I've been involved in. But it's large enough that looking at it from the inside might tell us something. We'll be running studies across labs in different countries, on different continents, and in different languages. In this podcast, you'll be part of that process. We're going to see what happens when many researchers work on the same problem at the same time, where things become complicated, what kind of obstacles come up, and what we do when they do. Some research projects begin with a clear plan. This one didn't. It started with a conversation at the kitchen table with Anita Eerland. At some point, we found ourselves talking about a study we both knew well. It's a study that's cited in almost every psychology textbook. So if you are a psychologist, you know it. The basic finding is simple. What you remember about an event isn't always exactly what happened. Information you encounter later can change how you remember it. But when we looked at that finding more closely, we both felt it was unresolved. So we kept talking, and that conversation eventually grew into the project that this podcast is about. So to start it all off, let's go one floor up from the kitchen to our recording studio. Now, it's safe to say that your memory is better than mine, so do you remember when we started talking about this study?
Well, not exactly, but I do remember that we talked about it. We talked about it many times, actually, over the last couple of years, partly because I find this study so fascinating, and also partly in relation to our wish to replicate cornerstone studies in our field. So, have you already explained the study?
Only the finding very generally. So
maybe this is a good moment then to talk about the study.
Sure,
right?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I thought you were going to explain it, but yeah, I can do that as well. So it's a study from 1974 by Loftus and Palmer. And in this study, people viewed videos of car crashes. Nothing serious, there were no victims. And then afterwards, people had to answer questions about what they just witnessed. Now, one of these questions asked people to estimate the speed of the cars at the time of the crash. Now, the trick was that this question was formulated slightly different for different people.
Mm-hmm.
So some people were asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? And others got the question, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? And you probably feel that these questions will lead to different speed estimates.
Can I say something about when you?
Yeah.
Because you say you probably feel that these questions, but wouldn't you think those questions have no effect whatsoever on the speed estimates because everybody watches the same video?
Yeah, maybe I'm biased because I already know the outcome of the experiment. But when I think about it now, it seems obvious that the phrasing of the question is going to influence the speed estimates. But maybe if I didn't know about this study and you would ask me without any prior knowledge, then maybe I would say, okay, they got the same video, so the same input, then the estimates should be the same.
Yeah, no matter what they heard later.
But I cannot actually answer that question because I know this study.
Right. That's true. You can't unthink it.
No, exactly. So right now it feels only logical to expect different speed estimates based on the verb that was used to describe the car crash. And yeah, that's exactly what was found in this study. So the estimates were higher when the cars smashed into each other, or when the question was phrased with the verb smash into, compared to when they hit each other. Now that's an interesting finding, but there's more, because the people in the study came back to the lab 3 weeks after they had seen the video of the car crash. And again, they were asked questions about the event, so just to see how the memory for the event was. And one of these questions was if there was broken glass on the road. Now, people were more inclined to say yes when they had heard the smashed into question compared to the hit question. But the most interesting thing is that the video of the car crash did not show broken glass at all. So people that said they had seen broken glass had actually false memory of the event.
Induced by the question that they got later on.
Yes. Well, the question influenced the amount of people, or the tendency of people to say, yes, there was broken glass.
Right.
But in any condition, there were people that claimed to have seen broken glass when in fact there was not.
Right.
So I think that everyone in psychology knows these findings. They are simple and very intuitive, but also a bit unsettling.
Why unsettling?
Well, people love to think that their memory functions as a recorder, so that the memories we retrieve are accurate representations of the events we encountered. But memory doesn't work like that, as this study nicely shows. So our memories are representations of events. And that is something that I taught my students only last week.
Oh, did you also talk about this particular study, or more generally about?
More generally. And we also did a test during the lecture in which they watched another crime. So, I don't know if you would say a car crash is a crime, but okay. They witnessed another event, and then they had to indicate which one was the perpetrator. And they didn't do so well. So that's in light of that demonstration, we talked about how we love to think that our memory functions as a recorder, but that it doesn't.
And now you're talking about teaching students, but at one point you were a student yourself, of course. So do you remember when you first learned about this study? The Loftus and Palmer study, I mean.
Yeah, well, as a psychology student, I took a course in legal psychology, and I think that this study was one of the ones that we had to read. So I think we discussed this study back then. And as a master student, I conducted a study myself, a replication of another memory study, or another study on false memories. And I think I've always been fascinated by the fact that we can have memories for events that did not happen.
Right, and that they can be implanted, let's say.
Yeah.
Now, of course, when you look at the record of the Loftus and Palmer study, so it's from 1974, and in Science for the Non-Scientists, I'll explain that, you can see how often a paper is cited. So other researchers who do research on a similar topic, or sometimes a totally different topic, will make reference to your paper, and then those references are stored somewhere, so you can actually see how often a paper is cited. And this Loftus and Palmer study is a highly cited paper. It's cited all over the place, thousands of times in cognitive psychology, in legal psychology, and beyond. So you would think that it's a solid study. It's almost beyond question.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that this really is a cornerstone study. So you would think there must be many replications. It's cited all the time, but when we discussed this study, we started looking into...
at the kitchen table.
We started looking into the replications of this study. And, there aren't that many, not that many systematic replications.
Yeah, and what that means is that we really don't know how robust this finding is across different contexts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was run in 1974 in America.
Right.
That was the year that I think Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd came out. So that's how long ago it is. I didn't know that at the time either. But what we then can ask is, well, will we observe that same phenomenon in 2026 and beyond? And will we observe it outside the US in other languages than English? So what are the boundaries of that effect?
Yeah, these are very interesting questions and questions that we talked about before. We wondered about the boundaries of the effect, but at that time we didn't really act on it. So we discussed it, but we didn't do anything. We thought it would be great to try to replicate the effect, but we did not have the time or the resources to actually do something with it. So every now and then we talked about the effect, but nothing really happened.
Yeah, that's true. But then at some point, the outside world came to our rescue and our question became more concrete.
Yeah, that was when NWO, so the Dutch Research Council, came with a call for replication research. And they were looking for cornerstone studies that had a lot of impact but were not replicated, or at least not a lot. And that's when the idea of replicating the Loftus and Palmer study across many labs started to come up again. And we had already done a large-scale replication project before, so I remember that, at least to me, this call felt like the thing we were waiting for.
Yeah, that's true for me as well. And because we wanted to test this effect across many contexts, I already mentioned languages, for example, we needed a lot of labs to join us.
Yeah, so that's when team science comes in. Instead of one lab running one study, because that could also be the proposal for the call. But we wanted to do it differently. So we wanted to coordinate many labs running variations of the same study, exactly to test the boundaries, as you explained before. And this gives you a much richer picture of the effect. But it also makes things more complicated, of course, in terms of organization.
That's true. Yeah, big team science is a big topic. And in fact, it's going to be the topic of a future episode of this podcast. So we'll hear much more about it. But anyway, we ended up responding to that NWO call.
Right.
And we wrote a grant proposal to do a large replication study of the Loftus and Palmer study. Now, one of those things that such projects are being evaluated on is feasibility. Yeah, it's nice to propose a large study with this many labs, but can you actually pull it off? So we needed to have a way to recruit labs to our effort. And so what I did was I wrote a blog post to gauge interest. So a blog post where we said, well, we're toying with this idea. We've submitted a grant proposal, but it's important for us to have enough labs being interested in our proposal and wanting to join us. And I thought, well, it'd be nice if we get 8 or 9 labs. After all, it's not even clear if we're going to get funded.
Right. But I remember that the response was overwhelming, which speaks to the impact of the Loftus and Palmer study. I thought it would be nice to actually visualize the interest. So I found this world map online. And then you can color the countries, for whatever reason. But I wanted to color the countries in which at least we had one researcher that was interested in participating. And it was really great to see the map show the map slowly turning red, because that was the color I chose. I don't know why, because it's not my favorite color.
It's mine.
But it looked like we were conquering the world, because every day new labs wanted to join, and then I got really excited when it was a lab from a country that we didn't had already. It was great to see. Yeah,
we even did states in the US separately so that it looked like more.
Because if you have just one researcher from the US, then suddenly, 1/3 of the map is red already.
Right, yeah. And I like that visualization very much. And it was also useful because at one point, I think in October 2025, I was going to be interviewed by the review committee about the proposal. So we already had pretty good reviews, but now, they want us to see a small group of, I guess, the ones that were still under consideration to present their ideas. And so I presented your red map of the world, and I think that must have helped.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do remember that one of the reviewers, you said they had questions about the feasibility. I remember that one of the reviewers of our proposal questioned whether we could actually get more than 20 labs, because I think that was what we wrote in the proposal.
Right. And so at first I thought, well, okay, when I write a blog post, if we have 8 or 9, then I can say, well, okay, if we get the funding, then it'll be easy to get another 12 or something like that. But of course, it didn't turn out to be a problem at all.
No, not really.
And so long story short, a few months later, the project got funded. And now that we were going to start for real, I wrote another blog post. I linked those, by the way, in the show notes. And even more people signed up. And I don't think anybody who had signed up previously left. I may not remember very well.
Maybe 1 or 2 people that weren't sure whether they could actually contribute. But
something like that, yeah. So now we're up to close to 100 collaborators, and some of these collaborators are from the same lab.
Right.
So we have 60 labs.
Yeah,
close to 60 labs. Yeah. And now it would be silly to have all 60 do the same replication. That's huge overkill and waste of resources.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, so that's why we when we started to become a little bit more ambitious, and we decided, well, we're not going to just replicate the Loftus and Palmer study, but also other studies that are in a similar vein, but use different methods, but kind of test the same idea. And so that's what we're going to do now. It's a lot more complicated logistically, but that's what we're going to try. And so we're going to do actually much more than we proposed in our proposal. So I actually think we need to get more money. But anyway.
I don't think MWO will agree with that. Well, or maybe they don't have the money.
No. But, a project of this size is great because it gives us a much better understanding of the phenomenon, namely, is memory malleable by later information, but more about that in a later episode.
And then another aspect that I really like about this approach is that we have so many languages. So from Norwegian to Vietnamese and anything in between.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting to see how the finding generalizes across cultures and languages as well.
Yeah, funnily enough, we got an email from a Vietnamese collaborator just earlier today, and who said, well, it's all nice, that study with the cars and the crashes. But in Vietnam, really, cars are not so much part of the scene. It's mostly scooters that we're used to. So if we run the study in Vietnam, we actually need to have videos of scooter crashes.
Yeah, and that sounds like a funny idea to have a video with scooters instead of cars. But of course, it matters what your real life experience is. And apparently, there are situations in which scooters make more sense than cars. And I have to say that I cannot think of any reason why that change would lead to different results, but that's what we're going to find out, of course.
Yeah, so I think that's what I like about a project of this, like this. I would have never, thought about scooters. There are days that I don't think about scooters, and
really?
Days go by that I don't think about scooters. And but it's a very valid point and a very interesting point. So that's exactly the sort of thing that we should investigate. So now we've talked. We've looked into the past at the origin of the project and how it came to be. But maybe in conclusion, let's look into the future. What excites you most about the project, and what worries you the most?
All right. So I really love to collaborate with people. So I'm looking forward to collaborate with so many different people in so many different countries. It's a challenge as well, of course, but one that I'm really looking forward to. Now, what worries me a bit is time management, because in projects like this, there are times where you almost have to work full-time, responding to emails, resolving issues. And we are running this project in addition to our normal work,
Right.
like teaching and supervising, other
research.
research. Yeah. So there will be times where having enough time for all the tasks that we need to work on might be a real challenge. But all in all, I'm really excited to start this adventure.
In each episode, we include a conversation with one of the researchers involved in the project about what they're seeing, thinking, or running into along the way, or in this case, at the very beginning of the project. I'll let the first guest introduce himself.
So my name is Massimo Grassi. I work at the Department of General Psychology of the University of Padua, Italy, which happens to be one of the oldest universities in the world, by the way. And I've got quite broad, spectrum of research interests. So I started mainly in auditory perception, and then gradually I moved to cognition because I was interested in the relationship between perception and cognition. And eventually, in the last few years, I've been interested very much in open science, in particular in big team science, which for me is like the future of psychology for several reasons. And I coordinated a multi-lab myself that we concluded a few months ago, fortunately. And I'm always also happy to participate to other multi-labs because I think it's a very good way for doing science, and in particular psychological sciences.
And of course, this one is about this Loftus and Palmer study from 1974. Do you remember when you first came across that study?
I think this Loftus experiment is one of the most classical ones you normally teach. You have to consider that I usually teach introduction to psychology. So very basic stuff at the first year of the bachelor level, things like, perception, attention, memory, etc., etc., etc. And the experiment by Loftus is definitely one of the experiments that I teach every year. It's a super classic in psychology. And also you should know that I was also suggesting in the past to students to take this specific study as an example for replication. And why? Here, for example, in Italy, bachelor students have often to conclude their career with a student project. And in many cases, I was suggesting to do a replication study, which was a nice idea to implement something working with your hands, have numbers in your hand. And the experiment by Elizabeth Loftus was often a target experiment because it had several good characteristics to be replicated.
Why is it such a good target for replication?
But first of all, in my particular case, when I was suggesting students to conduct this experiment, I was targeting a study that could be replicated with simple tools, let's say. So you just need a video. And actually, if you look on YouTube, you find the videos of the original experiment, if I remember well. Or you can recreate, you can cut and edit some videos from a film or something similar. The question is fairly easy. You can implement it, for example, in simple tools like Google Forms. So rather than, for example, suggesting to the student an experiment that was fairly complex and needed like expertise, like in programming and stuff, this type of experiment was a good target in the sense that it was fairly easy, and the student could be autonomous in replicating the experiment in pretty much any detail, let's say.
And you're saying it's a simple experiment, but there's still a few challenges, right? So you'd be running it in Italian, so you'd have to translate hit and smash into and so on. And also the videos, the original videos are from the 1970s. So those cars look very different from the cars we have nowadays. So so that's one of the challenges we have in this project, right? We need to have contemporary cars because...
Yeah, no. Definitely. For example, I was also thinking that in the past, in the 70s, pictures could be presented also large, for example, projected on a large screen. And for example, some of my students were like thinking, oh, but what happens if I project it in a smaller screen like a laptop? Does that make any difference, for example? Or, for example, on a smartphone. So where you see the video, but it's actually super small. So whether, for example, the size of the projection matters. So that would be interesting. And of course, as you suggested, and this was often a topic with the students, translating those words into Italian, it is challenging in the sense that you want to capture exactly the same nuances of the original language. But of course, any language has different words and nuances, and also interpreting the language might be a problem as well, in the sense that the reader or the subject might interpret the word in different ways. This is the tricky part, definitely, of the study.
Yeah, I agree. But I also think you're making a very good point about the size of the screen. And when I talked to Elizabeth Loftus before, she said she actually ran the study using a projector. And she projected on the wall or on a screen, and there were a few people in the room. She didn't think, we should do it that way now, because she does think it would translate to a computer screen. But it's still, I think, a valid point. Does the size of the screen matter? The degree to which you are immersed in that situation that you're viewing?
Definitely, the immersivity of the situation might be, or could be, a potentially interesting factor, at least, to investigate. So, for example, here in the department, potentially, let's say, we have a room which is called the cave, which is like, I don't know if you remember one of those 3D cinemas, in which you could project, for example, a film, not just in front of you, but side of you, etc., etc. So a very immersive situation. You can stand up and be in the room and see the video. And I guess that, for example, if we really caricaturize the extremes and take, for example, this condition, the cave that we have here in the department, or in contrast, for example, the screen of a small smartphone, then maybe could be a factor that modulates the effect.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, and it's something that we'll have to consider, the size of the screen for sure. So, we're at the beginning of this large project, and you already have experience in these large team efforts. So what are you most curious to see about this project? What are your expectations? What do you think about challenges?
Challenges, it will be definitely interesting to see whether it holds in various and different languages and in various and different contexts. So this is usually the main thing. I don't know whether there might be other factors that might contribute to the effect in general. Just thinking, I don't know, the country where you're living, or of course, here we are just caricaturizing like the usual behavior, driving behavior of people. For example, in Europe, I don't know, in Italy, we drive like mad people, and maybe you go to another country and all the traffic is more like polite and clean, etc., etc., etc. I don't know whether this might have an effect on the effect. In general, what I noticed when I participated in this multi-lab, that it is interesting to see how the same thing doesn't replicate never exactly in the same way across the labs. So, and of course, to me, this is interesting because it reveals how few we understand yet of psychology, in the sense that when we read a single paper, for example, representing one experiment, and we see the results are like written on the stone. And then when you do one replication, two replication, three replication, etc., 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 you see that actually results oscillate a lot, or might oscillate a lot. It depends, of course, on the type of effect you are investigating. And this somehow, it's challenging to understand in many cases. Of course, it depends on the phenomenon. because you have to understand why there are these oscillations. Sometimes it's just noise across the various labs, but sometimes it also reveals that we do not know much of the phenomenon, and there are these various possible ways in which the phenomenon might appear in our data.
So you're saying that's a challenge, but that's also an opportunity that this project offers, that we can actually study that variability.
Yeah, no, definitely. If you think about it is kind of peculiar that at least in psychology we are so unused to use replications. Sorry, something I forgot to say and mention before is that replicating, for example, classical results like these ones is actually a good thing in general, because this is what we teach, for example, at bachelor level. So we need to deliver information that is are really accountable. At the bachelor level, we cannot really do any mistake. So if we are building the foundations of students, we have to deliver them really good information. And then, for example, I noticed that in the last few years, for example, in some textbook, here and there sometimes appeared also results of studies that were not replicated later, for example.
In this project, what would you find surprising about the results, or let's say the whole process?
Of course, it would be surprising if we were not finding the effect. But I think that in general, this type of effort is really interesting because it gives you the size of the effect, which is something, let's say, a new target in psychology somehow, in the interpretation, in our reading of the results. So up to, say, a few years ago, but still today, we tend to interpret results in a binary way, so that there is an effect, there is no an effect. Okay, this can be done, and maybe also it simplifies the way we understand our results, in the sense that if we make things binary, everything becomes clear, like it's black or white. But actually, in psychology and in any empirical science, we actually work in 50 shades of gray. And understanding the size of an effect is really important, because, I don't know, for example, you can decide consequently whether invest on this effect or not. So the size of the effect to me is really the interesting things that emerges from multi-labs.
Is there anything else that you wanted to say about the project at this stage, where we're very early at the very beginning?
In general, I think that this type of operation, multi-labs, are also changing the way individual sciences approach science. So science is often like a kind of race and competition, let's say, which is okay in a certain sense. So it is good that labs compete, for example, if there is a phenomenon about that they want to investigate. But competition in the last few years became, in my opinion, a bit too high. And we missed that also science is also a social enterprise. And multi-labs are really the clear example that science can be run and conducted as a social enterprise. So to me, multi-labs are also offering not just the results, but also, let's say, a new environment and a new way for participating into science for scientists. So it is definitely offering to scientists, and definitely in psychology, a new way for doing science and participating into science.
What I find so interesting about these conversations is that they highlight different aspects of the project. With Anita, we talked about its background and its relevance, potentially, to legal psychology. And with Massimo, we talked about team science and about the relevance of the original study to teaching replication. But there was also something that both conversations had in common. In both cases, we talked about potential constraints on the effect. With Anita, we talked about our Vietnamese collaborator who was wondering, well, does this effect translate from cars to scooters. And with Massimo, we talked about, does the effect translate from a projection screen to a computer monitor or even an iPhone, for example? These are some of the questions that will occupy us for the months to come. A single experiment can be described in a few lines, but behind that description is a process of questions, decisions, and sometimes uncertainty. This project started with a simple question: how robust is a finding that we think we already understand? And by we, I mean the entire field of psychology. But once you start asking that question, it opens up others. How do you replicate a study that was done in the 1970s? And how do you do this across many languages and contexts? And how do you coordinate all of this? When do you conclude you have convincing evidence, one way or the other? And how do you come up with a research idea in the first place? These are the kinds of questions we'll explore in this series. And right now, we're still at the beginning, bringing researchers on board to form smaller teams for different parts of the project. So this is where it starts.